It was supposed to be an ordinary evening, one filled with laughter, champagne, and the clinking of fine china. But for Emily, this party would be far from ordinary. As she stepped out of the taxi, her heart raced with both excitement and a strange knot of anxiety. She was just a simple girl, and tonight she was about to enter a world that seemed too far out of her reach, a world of wealth, power, and sophistication. Little did she know, she was walking straight into a trap set by someone who had no interest in making her feel welcome. At the center of this world of excess was Vanessa, the kind of woman who seemed to have everything: beauty, a successful career, and more money than she could ever spend. But what she didn't have was the control she wanted over her son, Alex, and his decisions. Vanessa had spent years curating a perfect life for herself and her family, and she wasn't about to let some girl from a modest background ruin it. Emily, Alex's girlfriend, was everything Vanessa could not stand. Humble, hardworking, and most importantly, far from the kind of woman Vanessa had envisioned for her son. Vanessa had always imagined Alex would marry into wealth, like everyone else in their circle. But Emily, she didn't fit the mold. So when she found out about their relationship, it felt like a challenge to everything Vanessa had built. Emily had never been part of this world of luxury. Her family barely scraped by, and her father had always told her that the best things in life were material. But love had changed everything for her. Alex, with his kind heart and gentle nature, had swept her off her feet. He was everything she had ever wanted, and for the first time in her life, she felt like she belonged to something special. She never imagined that his mother, the wealthy and influential Vanessa, would make her feel like an outsider until that fateful invitation arrived. The invitation to the party had been lavish, gold-embossed, and addressed to her with a formal tone that immediately set her nerves on edge. It wasn't until Alex assured her that everything would be fine that Emily agreed to go. "It's just a party, Em. You'll fit right in. My mom doesn't bite," Alex had said, his smile reassuring her, even though deep down, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. As Emily arrived at the grand estate, her stomach churned with a mix of awe and unease. The mansion was breathtaking, with marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and walls lined with art worth more than her entire house. Guests mingled in designer outfits, their conversations a blur of expensive wines and extravagant vacations. It was a world she couldn't have imagined, a world where money and status ruled. As Emily took a deep breath, trying to blend in with the crowd, she couldn't help but feel a sense of isolation. But there was one person in the room who was watching her with a look of quiet amusement: Vanessa. Vanessa had been waiting for this moment. She had planned it all out. This was going to be the night she put Emily in her place. Her eyes followed every move Emily made as she nervously clutched her glass of champagne. The idea was simple: expose the young woman as out of her depth, make her feel small in front of everyone, and ensure that Alex would see how foolish she was to fall for someone like her. It was all a game to Vanessa, a way to assert her dominance and remind her son of the right people to associate with. She had already dismissed the idea of Emily being a true match for Alex, and tonight she would prove it. But what Vanessa didn't count on was Emily's quiet strength. Although she didn't belong to this world, she wasn't intimidated by it. She wasn't there to impress anyone. She was there because she loved Alex. And no amount of wealth or status would change that. As the evening wore on, she began to notice the subtle jabs Vanessa took at her. Comments about her dress, her background, and her lack of sophistication. Emily did her best to smile and laugh it off, but it was clear Vanessa was enjoying every moment of her discomfort. Just when Emily thought she could endure no more, something unexpected happened. A few of the other guests, who had been watching the drama unfold from a distance, began to question Vanessa's intentions. They whispered among themselves, unsure whether her behavior was as harmless as it seemed. Was this just a mother's concern for her son, or was there something more sinister at play? As the tension grew, Alex finally noticed the shift in the air. He saw the hurt in Emily's eyes and the smirk on his mother's face. He had always been close to his mom, but tonight he couldn't ignore the fact that she was deliberately trying to make Emily feel unwelcome. The weight of the moment hit him hard. Could he really let his mother tear down the woman he loved, all for the sake of her own ego? In a room full of people who had everything, Emily was the one who had nothing to prove, and Vanessa was the one who had everything to lose. But as the night spiraled towards its breaking point, Alex had to decide where his loyalty lay, with his mother or with the woman who had captured his heart. The music blared louder, the laughter grew more forced, and the atmosphere shifted from one of celebration to one of confrontation. Would Vanessa finally reveal her true intentions, or would Emily's quiet resilience turn the tide in a way no one saw coming? The night was far from over, and the tension was only just beginning to boil over. As the first argument broke out in front of the guests, all eyes turned to Alex, awaiting his next move. Would he defend his love, or would he stand by as his mother tore her apart? The next chapter of their story was about to unfold, and no one knew how it would end. The room seemed to close in around Emily as she stood there, unsure of what to do next. Vanessa had always been an imposing figure, the kind of woman who knew how to command a room with just a glance. But tonight, it felt different. Every sneer, every word dripping with condescension, was more than just a mother's concern. It was a calculated attempt to humiliate her. Emily could feel the weight of the stares from the other guests, as if they were all silently watching to see how she would react. Would she crumble under the pressure, or would she rise above it? As the evening wore on, Emily couldn't help but reflect on how different her life was from the world she had just stepped into. She had grown up in a modest home, where the most expensive thing they owned was the old car her father drove to work. Her mother, who had passed away when she was younger, always taught her that wealth didn't define a person's worth. It was kindness, integrity, and love that mattered most. Those lessons had stuck with her throughout the years, even when life had thrown her countless challenges. But now, standing in the midst of this opulence, those lessons felt like a distant memory. Here in this world of glittering chandeliers and designer gowns, she was nothing but an outsider. Meanwhile, Alex stood off to the side, caught between two worlds. On one hand, he loved his mother. She had given him everything he could ever ask for: comfort, security, and opportunities beyond what most people could ever dream of. But on the other hand, he couldn't ignore the fact that his mother's behavior was cruel, and it was hurting the woman he cared about. He had always known that his mother had high expectations for his future, but he never realized how far she would go to impose her vision of what was right. The conflict he felt was suffocating. He loved Emily, but the pull of his family, especially his mother, was powerful. Could he really go against her? Could he stand by Emily's side, knowing what it might cost him? As the night progressed, Emily tried to keep her composure. She smiled politely when people complimented her, though she could sense the underlying judgment in their eyes. She felt like a character in a story where she didn't belong, surrounded by strangers who viewed her as an enigma. A poor girl who somehow managed to snag the heart of someone like Alex. And yet, despite all the judgment, Emily refused to apologize for who she was. She wasn't going to let anyone dictate her worth. She had earned everything she had through hard work and perseverance. If anything, she wanted to prove to herself, and to Alex, that she wasn't intimidated by the glittering world his mother had created. Vanessa, however, wasn't ready to let go of her plan. As the night unfolded, she began to make her moves, subtly pushing Emily into uncomfortable situations. She invited her to join a conversation with some of her wealthier friends, each of them dressed in the finest clothes money could buy. The conversation was about nothing of substance: vacations in the French Riviera, expensive new cars, and the latest designer trends. But Emily couldn't help but feel like she was under a microscope. Her dress, though elegant, was far from the designer labels the others wore. She didn't know the first thing about luxury handbags or private jets. As they discussed their latest shopping sprees, Vanessa turned to Emily with a smile that was anything but warm. "So Emily," Vanessa said, her voice laced with mock sweetness, "do you ever shop in places other than discount stores? I'd love to know what you think of some of the new collections." The room fell silent as all eyes turned to Emily. She could feel her face flush, her nerves fraying at the edges. But she refused to let Vanessa see her discomfort. "I'm not really into shopping," Emily replied, her voice steady despite the growing tension. "I prefer saving my money for experiences, things that really matter, you know." Vanessa's smile didn't falter, but Emily could see the flicker of annoyance in her eyes. She had hoped Emily would crack, that she would show her true colors, her so-called lack of class. But Emily had proven her wrong. The conversation quickly shifted, but the seed of discomfort had been planted. Vanessa was far from done, and Emily could feel her eyes on her as she moved through the room, looking for the next opportunity to strike. Meanwhile, Alex had been watching from across the room, his heart sinking with every passing moment. He could see what his mother was doing, and it pained him to know that Emily was suffering because of it. But he didn't know how to fix it. How could he stand up to his mother when she was the one who had given him everything? How could he choose between the woman he loved and the woman who had shaped his entire life? As the night wore on, the tension between mother and son reached a boiling point. Vanessa, unable to hide her frustration any longer, pulled Alex aside, away from the crowd. Her voice was low, but sharp, a tone he hadn't heard in years. "Alex," she began, her eyes narrowing, "do you really think this girl is the one for you? She doesn't belong in our world. She'll never fit in, no matter how hard she tries. You can't waste your time with someone like her." Alex's heart pounded in his chest. He had heard the same words before, but never so directly. The weight of his mother's expectations had always been there, but now it felt suffocating. "Mom, I love her," Alex said, his voice trembling with emotion. "She makes me happy. I don't care about all the stuff you think matters. I care about her." Vanessa's eyes flashed with anger, and for a moment, Alex saw something in her he hadn't recognized before, a deep, almost primal desire to control him. She stepped closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "You don't know what you're getting into," she warned. "If you choose her, you'll lose everything. Everything I've worked for, everything we've built. You'll never be part of this world again." The words hit Alex like a slap across the face, and for a moment, he was paralyzed. His mind raced, torn between the woman who had raised him and the woman who had captured his heart. What was he willing to sacrifice for love? Would he stand by Emily, or would he walk away from everything he had ever known? As the party continued around them, the tension between Alex and Vanessa reached its peak. Emily, unaware of the conversation taking place just feet away, began to feel the weight of the night's events press down on her. She knew something was off, but she couldn't put her finger on it. Would she be able to hold her ground, or would Vanessa's plan succeed? The night was far from over, and with every passing moment, it became clearer that things were about to change forever. The night had reached its tipping point. Every moment felt heavier than the last, and Emily, sensing that something was about to break, was on edge. She wandered aimlessly through the crowd, looking for Alex, hoping to find a moment of comfort amidst the tension. But when her eyes met his across the room, she knew something had shifted. The look in his eyes told her everything. He was struggling, torn between her and the world he'd grown up in. A world she had never been part of, but was now at the center of. As the minutes passed, Emily's anxiety mounted. She didn't want to be the source of conflict between Alex and his family, but she also couldn't stand by and let Vanessa continue with her silent cruelty. It was clear that Vanessa would stop at nothing to drive a wedge between them. The hurtful comments, the subtle undermining, everything pointed to one thing. Vanessa was trying to break them apart. Finally, Emily could no longer remain silent. She took a deep breath and made her way to the grand staircase, where Alex and Vanessa stood talking, their voices sharp and low. She didn't know what she was going to say, but she couldn't wait any longer. As she reached the top of the stairs, she hesitated for a moment, gathering her courage. Then, with her heart racing, she descended, her eyes locked on Alex. He looked up, his face a mix of guilt and confusion. It was now or never. "Alex," Emily called out softly, her voice shaking with emotion. He turned to her, his face filled with surprise and concern. But Vanessa, sensing the shift in the air, shot her a cold, calculating smile. "Ah, the girl who doesn't belong," Vanessa remarked sharply, her eyes narrowing. "You know, Emily, for someone who claims to care about my son, you sure don't understand how things work in our world." Emily stood tall, despite the knot in her stomach. She could feel the weight of the room's eyes on her, but she refused to back down. She had nothing left to lose. "Vanessa, I don't need to understand your world to know what's right," Emily replied, her voice steady. "I don't need your approval to love your son, and I won't let you turn me into something I'm not just to fit in with your vision of what's acceptable." For a moment, there was a stunned silence. Vanessa's face flushed with rage, but she said nothing. It was as though Emily's words had struck a nerve she couldn't silence. Alex stepped forward, his hand reaching out for Emily's, and the gesture felt like the most natural thing in the world. "Mom, this isn't about your world," Alex said, his voice firm now, no longer wavering. "It's about love. Emily is the person I want to be with, and no one, not even you, can change that." Vanessa's eyes flickered with disbelief, as if hearing her own son defy her was the greatest betrayal. She had always been the one in control, the one who made the rules, but now she saw for the first time that Alex had grown beyond her reach. The realization stung more than she could have imagined. "You're making a mistake," Vanessa spat, her voice trembling with fury. "You'll regret this, Alex. You'll see that she's not the one for you. This will never work." But Alex wasn't listening anymore. He turned to Emily, his face softening with the warmth of his love for her. In that moment, all the tension, all the doubt that had filled the air for the past few hours, evaporated. Alex knew he had made his choice. "I'm not leaving her, Mom," he said quietly, his words resolute. "I'm choosing Emily. I love her." The room was still, and the weight of Alex's declaration hung heavy in the air. Vanessa, standing there, was like a statue, frozen in disbelief. For a brief moment, Emily wondered if this was it. If this was the final chapter, the culmination of all the tension and fear. But then she realized, no matter what Vanessa said, no matter how much she tried to manipulate them, this was their story. And they were writing it together. Vanessa's face twisted with anger, but there was nothing more to say. She turned away, storming off into the depths of the mansion, her footsteps echoing in the silence she left behind. Emily let out a breath she didn't realize she had been holding, and Alex's hand tightened around hers. It was over. The battle had been fought, and the love they shared had prevailed. The rest of the guests, who had witnessed the exchange, began to murmur among themselves. Some looked shocked, others sympathetic, but most seemed to understand what had just transpired. This was no longer just a party. It was a turning point, a moment where Alex and Emily had found the strength to stand up for what truly mattered. Later that evening, as the last of the guests trickled out of the mansion, Emily and Alex stood together, watching the sun dip below the horizon from the grand patio. It had been a night full of surprises, full of tension and fear, but now, in the quiet aftermath, it felt like a new beginning. "I thought I'd lose you tonight," Emily admitted softly, her voice filled with vulnerability. "I thought you'd choose her over me." Alex shook his head, his eyes filled with sincerity. "I was confused, but I know who I want, Emily. It's always been you." With the weight of the evening behind them, they stood together, stronger than before, knowing that no matter what challenges lay ahead, they had each other. The love they shared wasn't about wealth, status, or expectations. It was about something deeper, something unbreakable. In that moment, Emily realized that love wasn't about fitting into a world that wasn't yours. It was about finding someone who accepted you for who you were. And she had found that with Alex. As the night fell silent around them, they walked hand in hand, ready to face the future together, no longer afraid of the world that tried to tear them apart. It had been a battle, but they had emerged victorious, and the story of their love had just begun.